So we said the Middle Ages is divided into three parts. So this is our third of the three. We had the early, the high last time, and the late Middle Ages. So a lot of the things that we talked about last time, it's just going to be just the opposite this time. All of the sort of negative things that you said last time when I asked you about the Middle Ages, that's what's happening here. A lot of warfare, a lot of death, a lot of disease, all that kind of thing, everything in decline. Well, the food supply is declining, the trade is declining. Because the food supply is declining, so too the population will decline. For all the reasons that it grew last time when the food supply went up, the food supply goes down, those are all the reasons why it declines. So I won't go over those, but you can understand that. And eventually even famine will begin. 1315 to 1317, famine begins. This will be devastating. Most people believe it was caused by a shift in weather patterns and we might call global cooling. You know, sometimes people sort of act like the weather is changing now and has never changed before. That's simply not true. Weather patterns have changed many times throughout history. They certainly are changing at this time. And in fact, things are getting cooler, which means then the growing season is less. You see? In places where it actually gets cold, not like Florida, if you have fewer days when it's warm, then things won't grow as much, right? Or as long. So you don't get as much yield. And because of that, we'll see then that by the time you get to the 1330s or the 1340s, you have widespread hunger across Europe. With that hunger then is often, with famine, often comes disease. Because as people get weaker, they get hungrier, they get weaker, then they get less likely to be able to resist disease. And a new disease is coming into town. This disease has often been called, well, it has at least 2 or 3 different names. Very commonly it's called the Black Death. It gets the name Black Death because of what it does to the person. It changes their skin to black and blue coloring, as you see on her neck down here. This is caused when blood vessels rupture under the skin. Then you get a bruise, which darkens, usually changes the color of the skin. And this is happening because of the swelling. There's a lot of swelling that takes place. The swelling bursts the blood vessels release the blood, and you get the change in coloration. So that's the name. It's also called the bubonic plague. Perhaps that's a more official name. Yeah. Can I get you to take the earphone out, please? Thanks. Bubonic plague comes from the idea like bulbous, swelling. So bubonic means, and people get swelling around their lymph nodes. Have you studied lymph nodes? You know where they are? Where are most of your lymph nodes? Neck is part of it. Under your arms, especially. The groin area also. What does the lymph nodes do for you? What are they? They're a part of what's called the lymphatic system. Anybody know what that does? Signal to the brain? The lymphatic system is a part of your immunity, part of your immune system. So in fact, it fights bacteria and infections. So when you get in an infection, you can often get swelling of the lymph nodes. So if you Press around here on your neck, kind of under your chin. If you feel knots there or swelling, yeah, you should go to the doctor, because that means you've got some kind of an infection, and it should be addressed. Could be serious, may not be, but that's what's happening. And those things really got swollen up with these people. They would get as big as golf balls, tennis balls. You know, they're getting pretty good size. And when that swells like that, it ruptures the blood vessels. So that would discolor the body. We know why, and we know what causes it. It's caused by a bacteria, Yersinia pestis. This picture in the middle here is a picture through a microscope, which shows the bacteria. So the bacteria gets to the human by a flea bite. The flea bites the human, the bacteria passes from the flea to the human. How did the flea get the bacteria? The flea got the bacteria from a rat. The rat has the bacteria, the flea bites the rat. The flea then jumps on a human, bites a human, the human gets the bacteria, the human gets the disease. This was a disease, a bacteria that had not been entered into Europe, Western Europe before, and it kills lots of people. Ends up being 25 to 50% of all people in Western Europe. But it also had killed people along the way. Killed people in the Middle East, killed people, as it came across Asia. This was a terrible disease that it spread, and it spread along the lines of trade. Well, what are the symptoms? Maybe you have it. Earlier, someone was in here sneezing, spreading disease, flying all over the room. Could she possibly be infected? Maybe. Does she have a fever? No? Aching joints? Oh, yeah. Aching joints, fever, seems warm in here to me. A little bit of sweat. Yeah. Swelling lymph nodes? Maybe. I think maybe a couple of them. Any dark blotches, bruising, subdermal bleeding? Well, by the time it gets to that point, it's pretty much clear you've got it, and everybody can usually see it and tell you've got it. People did not want you to really know they had it. Why? Why not? If you have a disease, do you like to go up and announce it to people? Why not? They'll stay away from you, yeah. They're going to treat you differently. They might avoid you. See, he just coughed, so that makes me nervous. Yeah, well, that's what they all say. Anyway, yeah, well, if somebody knows you have this disease, guess what? They know you're not going to live very long. Chances are you're going to get very sick and probably going to die in less than 2 weeks. From the time you know you have it to the time you die is 10 to 14 days. That's usually depends on the person, but, In other words, it's pretty quick. It's not like something you get and it just hangs on for months or something. This is something that's pretty quick. And the other thing that people know is this. If I am near someone who has this disease, has this problem, I'm far more likely to have that problem myself. So I want to stay away from you as far as I can. So when you're sick, guess what? I'm not helping you. You're on your own. You get too weak to get up, well, I hope you're in a different room. If you die, I don't want to go and mess with your body either. I don't want to bury you. I don't want to carry you out. I don't want to touch you because I don't want to get what you have. Now, they didn't know about bacteria. They didn't know about the fleas and the rats and all that like we do. But they didn't know this. If I get close to somebody who's sick or somebody who died, my chances of getting this go way up. So this means that, for a lot of these people, they do not want to get close. In fact, doctors, I don't think I have a picture of it here, but doctors would wear special kind of mask. It looked like a bird beak to filter the air because they thought it was coming through the air, like when she was sneezing and he's coughing. And so that was to try to protect them. So they kind of look like they got big bird heads on, like big, I don't know, like a big mask. And, really it tended to be just fairly devoted Christians who would help those who were sick, who were willing to do it. Guys from monasteries, women, stuff like that, who were sort of like nuns, monks, very devoted orders, they would go and help. And then, of course, to bury, people did not want to be involved with that. So that was also considered to be dangerous. Well, so people would treat you differently if you have that disease. So probably you would try to hide it, maybe hoping it would go away, hoping people would not shun you or, sort of kick you out of the village. They see you in town, get out of town, buddy. We don't want you in town. So rats via fleas to humans, and the humans, it didn't kill the rats, killed the humans. Rats are pretty tough. Yeah.
What happened when people passed away? Like they would just leave them there?
Well, a lot of times they would. Other times they would, sometimes they would dig like a big hole and throw them in there. Yeah. Because it got to be pretty smelly, as you might imagine. One account, I met a guy who studied ancient disease, and he gave an account that what they did, this is in the Middle East, they put a bunch of people on like boats, and they just towed the boat out into the Mediterranean and cut the rope and sailed away and just let them float out there, the bodies, because they didn't want to get too close to them. They throw them on the boat, and then they would just leave them floating out there. Yeah, maybe. Well, anyway, where did it all start? Started in Asia. It certainly seems to spread along with the Mongol expansion. Can we blame the Mongols? Well, I don't know. Why not? They can take it. But really, as the Mongols move west, why are they moving? Why are they moving west? A lot of people say they're moving west because of the climate is changing. That's why they're moving. Could be other reasons. The rat also tends to move with them, and it's following trade routes. Like those Silk Road, stuff like that. So we see it spreads along trade lines, and death becomes a way of life. Can death become a way of life? Well, I guess it does here. People think about it. People have to deal with it. If 25 to 50% of all the people die in this room, what do we got? 30 some people. That means within just probably a few weeks or months, half of you would be gone. This room would be half as full. You're definitely going to notice it. The whole campus have half as many people on it. The whole city, Lakeland has 100,000 people, we'd be down to 50,000 people in maybe a year or two. I mean, people are going to notice it. You're not going to be able to avoid it. Death is around you, and then that's going to affect the way you think, as well as the way you live. It moves quickly from south to north. That's the thing to remember. It's coming from, remember, over here in Asia, and it gets to the Middle East first and kills a lot of people here, and then it begins to spread trade routes from the Middle East up. A lot of it's coming by ship into the islands and the ports of Italy and southern France, and then it moves quickly and goes all the way up into Scandinavia, Denmark, Norway, Sweden. And this all happens quickly. Starts December of 1347. By December of 1350, 3 years later, it's all the way up here. 3 years. And in its wake, well, lots of dead people.
How will it stop?
Well, that's a good question. It stops, I guess, because of, most people would say two things. One thing is, there are some people who are resistant to it. They can survive it, and once they survive it, they have a resistance. They will be less affected the next time. And then probably when they have children, the children are more resistant, right? And therefore they won't get it as much. The other thing is that since it's coming with a particular rat, an Asian black rat, it appears that the Asian black rat eventually gets, it sort of pushed out the brown rat of Europe. The brown rat of Europe fights back and regains some of it, and the black rat tends to die off or migrate back to warmer lands, Probably those black rats don't like it all the way up in Norway. But I don't know if anybody has the answer, and it doesn't just stop. It continues in wave after wave for many years. So it takes a long time. Well, Italy is devastated by it. 50 to 60% of Italy is estimated dying in just a couple of years, maybe 3 or 4 years. Here are artwork. This is showing some of the bodies here. They're actually wrapping up the bodies in a cloth, like a sheet, haul them away. Mostly it's clergy that's doing a lot of this work because other people don't want to touch them, the bodies. 1347 arrives from the Middle East. It's recorded in Sicily, recorded in then Sardinia, Corsica, Marseille, France, in the south of France. By 1348, in the port cities of Italy, places like Venice, Genoa. Pisa. Spreads quickly then to southern France, Spain, and then moving northward from there into the rest of France, Germany, England, the Low Country as it's called, the Netherlands, Belgium, and Denmark, then Scandinavia, Sweden, Norway. Okay? So it's happy times. Happy times. A lot of death, a lot of destruction, a lot of dead bodies to deal with. It's going to spread over Europe. Northern Europe by 1348, England 1349. Later, of course, there are reports of it. We don't have as much records in Eastern Europe. Certainly it hits Eastern Europe as well. You see these arrows where it's moving up through Eastern Europe, Western Europe, Scandinavia. In some cases, complete towns and cities are gone. They're just eliminated. In some cases, most of the people died, and then the rest of the people left. There was so much sickness in the city. In other words, it was higher than 50%. And then people decided, I'm getting out of here. And they would leave. And it'd be like a ghost town. The whole town would just be abandoned. Who wants to go there? You want to, okay. Yeah, yeah, you want to go there. Oh,
So I
no.
have a question.
Yes.
Do people live in these towns today, or have they stayed abandoned?
I see. Well,
And if so, when did people start moving back?
well, I think eventually people might have come back. I think a lot of times this stuff just fell apart and they moved to other communities. I think probably today it has. Well, I think they waited, they wait 100 years, or more, have a ghost town. Then eventually somebody decides they're brave, they go back. But, is it worth, at that point, what's left, So, yeah, I don't know if we have, it would be interesting to look at that. I've not looked at the details of those abandoned towns to see if they ever did come back. Some of them were not well built, so they didn't really last. And I'm sure they were then perhaps reoccupied or turned into farmland, different things. But mainly it was the stigma of it. If you knew this town 75, 80% of the people died, the rest of the people left. Do you really want to go back there? Why would you want to go back there? There's nobody there, and you might get sick. Well, anyway, it's estimated then, and again, these are estimates, that between a 4-year period, 25 to 50% of all the people in Europe die. So, if we estimate the population of 75 million, that means 19 to 38 million people die in 4 to 5 years. That means that every single person who's still alive is going to know a lot of people who are not. It's going to be people close to you, probably people in your family, your relatives, your friends, people you work with. They're not going to be there. And it's not just this one wave of 4 years. The threat of this disease and the reoccurrence of this disease does happen. And it does continue, and that brings about a lot of fear. There are major outbreaks in 1361, 62, 1369, and there are intermittent outbreaks in the 14th and 15th centuries. So in the 1300s, 1400s, you're going to have occasions of this Black Death or bubonic plague reoccurring. Why did it end? Well, that's a good question. People became eventually more resistant, and it's believed the brown rat replaced the black rat, and that's what eventually brought it to an end. You can see these people drawing, you see the swellings that they put on their neck, chest areas. You have a fever, people get very weak. Obviously they get thirsty. Hard for them to get water, especially if nobody wants to bring it to them. So those who took care of them would mainly just try, the only thing they could really do is just try to ease their pain a little, give them water, give them a cloth that was wet to put on their forehead to try to cool them down, that kind of thing. Okay? And hope they recovered. And some people did. Not everybody that got the disease died. Not everyone, but many people did. Well, we've looked at the how and the where. But what about the reaction? What would your reaction be if suddenly there was a disease in the United States that wiped out 25 to 50% of the people in 4 years? How would that affect you? You would move and take the disease with you. They may not let you move. Yeah, we don't want you in Canada. We don't want you in Mexico.
What if we are the part that dies?
What's that?
We don't even live. What if we die?
You might die.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there's one thing to be pretty assured of in life, and that's death.
Yes.
We don't like to think about it.
I mean, at least it's like quick. It's not prolonged death.
Yeah.
Like,
So on the bright side, you'll die quickly. The pain won't last for more than a couple of weeks, I guess. Yeah. Well, yeah, I suppose. I mean, it's not like it's going to take months or years for you to die. See? Yeah. I guess every year we live, we're dying, so we're closer to death. Well, we don't want to get too depressed,
you get close to dying.
because I'm a lot closer to it than you are. What's that?
You get closer to dying as soon as you're born.
See, there you go. So, why do we go on? Oh, wait a minute. That took a quick turn, didn't it? No. No, this is supposed to be a happy occasion. Let's not argue over whom killed who. Well, the reactions then. How would you react to the Black Death? What do people normally do when bad stuff happens to them? What's that? They blame someone. I like the way you're thinking. That's exactly true. They do blame somebody. You remember, there's this book called the Bible. I've mentioned it before. I do recommend it to you. In that, in the very beginning, like if you start at the very beginning, you'll find a story about a guy named Adam and a lady named Eve.
People blame each other.
Yeah, they did something. Something went wrong, right? They blame each other. Well, who does Eve blame?
The snake.
The snake. Who does Adam blame?
Eve.
Yeah, but you know, if you actually read it carefully, he blames God. He says, "That woman that you gave me." See, God, if you wouldn't have given me that woman, it's really your fault, God. You're the one that gave me that woman. You're the one that brought that woman in here, and then all this stuff started happening. Before that, everything was fine. It was a paradise around here, God. I was just hanging out with my animal friends, and everything was fine. But then you had to go and bring that woman here, and now look what's happened. Well, I mean, that's what people do. They blame each other. They blame God, right? They blame their parents. They blame the government. They blame, I don't know. I get all kinds of stuff. People say they're, like they can't get their work in on time. I had one guy who said, of course now they always blame MyFire. Their computer, MyFire. I had one guy who blamed his dog. Now that's an old excuse that your dog ate your homework. But this one was different. I liked it. It was a little bit different. He said his dog chewed the wire to his wireless router up. And so he couldn't get online because he didn't have another wire, one of those connector wires, and the dog had chewed up the connector wire, therefore his Wi-Fi wasn't working. And he sent me a picture of the wire that his dog had chewed. So that was the first. That was the first one on that one. Anyway, but we do blame everybody else, Like if you don't do well in this class, you're probably going to blame me. That happens. People do. They'll say, "Why did you give me this grade?" I say, "Well, look, I didn't give you that grade. You earned that grade." Okay, well, that's a
If
different.
you don't do well in this class, you are going to blame us.
No, I wouldn't blame you. I don't blame anybody. That's just what happened. Oh, no, I wouldn't blame anybody. I was late to work. Those people on the road, a guy cut me off. Wasn't my fault. I had to speed around him. Told the cop. He didn't listen. He's got a quota, He's got to give me a ticket. Because, he's got to get so many tickets every month. Well, these are all things I've heard, right? I'm not saying I've ever said them, but I've heard them. Well, we like to blame. And so some people blame God for this Black Death, for this bubonic plague. Why? God sent us this in order to punish us. It's His fault. He's judging us. I suppose implied in that we did something wrong, right? So maybe it's our fault, but really it's God's fault because, couldn't He go a little easier on us? After all. Some say it wasn't God, it was the devil. The devil's doing it to me. The devil sent this disease. The devil's after me. He's probably after me because I'm doing so much good. I've heard people say that. The reason bad stuff's happening to me is because Satan's after me because I'm doing so much good and he wants to slow me down. Some people did say that. The devil was out to get it. The devil's out to get me. Of course, we like to blame each other, or sometimes we will even blame ourselves. These guys are taking it into their own hands to try to alleviate the Black Plague. What are they doing?
Hitting themselves?
They're hitting themselves. They've got little,
Whipping themselves?
here's a little handle, and these are whips. Yeah. They got their shirts off. They got a whip in each hand. Right arm over the left shoulder. Left arm over the right shoulder. Boom, boom, boom. They're punishing their bodies to try to make up for the bad stuff that's going on. If this bad stuff is here because we are sinners or we have sinned, we have collectively sinned, we've individually sinned, we're going to punish ourselves for that sin. You ever done something like that? I call this extreme sports for Christianity. You know, jumping off a mountain without a parachute, just whoop, this is just going to whack myself with this stuff. Oh, we kind of do this a little bit, right? I've known people that have done stuff and they kind of got guilty about it. And then they say, well, I guess I better go to church this week, you know, because I got to kind of make up for what I did. Kind of like the old preacher used to say, people go out on Saturday night and sow their wild oats. And then they come to church on Sunday morning and they pray for a crop failure.
Yes.
Right?
That's so
You ever heard that?
Yeah.
And so they want to make up for it. Well, I did have bad stuff last night or last weekend or whatever, so I'm going to go to church. Or somebody will say, I'll make a deal with God. God, don't let me get caught for this.
Oh my God.
Oh, Lord, please. Don't let anybody find out about this. If you, Lord, if I don't get caught doing this, I promise I'll never do it again. I promise I'll be better, Lord. I promise I'm going to dedicate myself to you this time, Lord. I'm going to be a missionary, Lord.
I've heard some missionary stories like that.
Yeah. Well, sure. I mean, or they'll go and they'll say, you know what? I guess I better put something in the offering plate this week. Whew. You know, I've done some. Here's a 20, God. Here's a 50, God. You know, God, we got kind of a deal here. I gave you that 50 now, so we're kind of even, right? Nobody's going to find out.
The sad part is some people actually think that way, like they believe
Well, I
it.
think a lot of people think. A lot of people think that way. A lot more people act that way. Whether they're thinking that way or not, they may not want to admit it. That's why some guy's done a lot of bad stuff. At the end of his life, in his will, he'll leave money to some charity or some church or something to say, you know what? I stole a lot of this money from people, but I'm going to give it back now here at the end, just in case there's a heaven up there, I might get in.
Oh my God, I saw an example of that.
Yes?
It's this show called Drugs Incorporated, and I was watching it yesterday.
Drugs Incorporated.
Yes, and I was watching it, and
I guess it's a comedy.
no, it's actually really serious. It's actually a true thing. Like they
True
follow
thing.
cops around, and they meet all these drug dealers.
And the cops become drug dealers?
No.
Oh.
It's true. And
Okay.
so this guy, like an elder in a Mormon church, he used
Okay.
to sell drugs in Mormon church. He used to like sell
Yeah.
heroin
Mhm.
and things like that. And he was like, yeah, well, you see, I sell these drugs, but I give money to the charity,
Yeah.
and I tithe more than 10%. So it's
Exactly. You've done it.
so I mean, I do good things with
Exactly.
it.
I got this illegal money. You know,
I sell heroin and I destroy other people's lives, but sure, I tithe more than 10%.
I think this is confession time. Confession is good for the soul. This is all being recorded, by the way. Anyway, so this will all be admissible in court. We heard her say it. It wasn't me. Yes. People do try to make up for stuff like this. They blame others, or they try to make a deal with God. They try to sort of, and that's sort of what these guys are doing here. Maybe they did something wrong. Maybe other people. Maybe we're just so good at people, we're going to take the blame for you. Whack, whack, whack. Sometimes people deny themselves stuff to sort of say, well, I was bad, so now I'm going to be good. I'm not going to go to Starbucks this week. That'll make up for it. Even though they got the pumpkin spice, and now they're going to get the peppermint stuff. I'm only going to have 50 of those this year instead of 100 like I like. All right. Well, people do resort to what we might call asceticism. Asceticism is when you deny yourself something you like, something pleasurable, or you actually cause yourself pain in order to have a spiritual motivation to it, right? We have a mild form of this. Some people do in the spring. They call it Lent. You ever heard of Lent? I don't know if any of you practice Lent, but Lent is kind of like that. You say, oh, well, what I do for Lent every year is I say I refuse to eat broccoli during Lent. And that's my...
Well, do you actually
And sometimes
like
spinach, too. What?
Do you actually eat broccoli for the rest of the year?
We don't need to get to the details. I'm not going to eat broccoli, for 40 days, and then at the end I can have all the broccoli I want, which will probably be about the same amount. I eat broccoli once in a while. But yeah, it's a form, and what you're supposed to be doing, say in Lent, which is very mild, it's not like that, it's very mild, is you take something that you enjoy, something that you like, whatever, usually a food or a drink or something, and you say, okay, I'm not going to eat that food, or I'm not going to drink that drink. And then when I think about how I'd like to have that broccoli, that I will remember that I am doing this on purpose and think of the spiritual side of it, right? That Jesus denied himself things, and I should deny myself things. Fasting would be another form. All right. So I'm not saying it's all bad. I'm just saying sometimes people go, well, we might say extreme with it. And sometimes it's to make up for things. Another people they tried to blame were Jews. Blame God, blame ourselves, blame Satan. Jews, especially in Spain and Germany. You know why? Because the Jewish population, in large part, did not suffer of this disease at the same rate as others. Many Jews, it was not 25 to 50% of Jews dying. And people noticed that a lot of Jews were not dying, and a lot of us are dying. And why aren't the Jews dying? So their answer was, the Jews did this to us. They said the Jews poisoned our wells. They come in at night, they poison the wells, they gave us something, they're kind of sneaky, and they gave this to us, and they're nefarious, how's that a good word? And that's how we got this. Well, why do you think Jews would not get it at the rate of, say, Christians or others? Yeah.
Because they follow the Old Testament customs pretty strictly, which ended up being that they ended up washing themselves far more often than your average European did, so they were less likely to actually have the germs.
Yeah, that's good. Give yourself an imaginary bonus point. That was very good. Yeah, that's exactly right. The Jews follow the customs, not only dietary, but ritualistic cleansing, purification, washings, right? Mikvaot, and they wash themselves much more than the other Europeans. That probably kept the fleas off of them. Also, they kind of they're in their own community. So if you got a whole community of people who are washing more, you probably got a lot less fleas around, and so forth. See?
I knew you were going to say something. I knew it.
See? Mm-hmm. He said he just coughed on purpose, but that sneeze seemed pretty real. Yeah. Well, anyway, so the Jews got blamed for it. And because of that, many Jews fled Spain and Germany because they were being persecuted. And they actually fled to Russia and Poland, to Eastern Europe. So this explains how so many Jews got from Western Europe to Eastern Europe. They fled persecution in the medieval period. Yeah, if you think about it, today, you don't have to tell me, but I would guess many of you bathe at least once a month, right? Take a shower. No? 2 months? Once every 2 months?
Every day.
Oh, every day. Yeah, today it's become much more the custom that people take a shower or a bath or something every day. That is pretty modern. You don't have to go back too far until that was not the case, because that's very expensive. You have to have a lot of equipment to do that. You have to have a lot of hot water, for one thing. Some people go in that shower, they're in there for like an hour in there. Water's running the whole time, gallon after gallon. You have to have a very large hot water heater now. A lot of people have 50 gallons. Some people have a 100-gallon hot water heater. It means they're keeping hot water hot, 100 gallons of it all the time. 24 hours a day, every day of the year. That takes a lot of energy. You gotta have a big hot water heater, right? And people used to have little hot water heaters. Why? Because, they weren't taking a shower, like a half-hour shower every day. And they didn't have 4 people doing that. That takes a lot of water. So, if you think about it, in medieval times, if you wanted hot water, you had to heat it up over a fire. If you wanted a bath, you had to heat it up, pour it in there, empty it all out by hand. So it wasn't that long ago, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, where a lot of people would only take a bath once a week. Once a week was considered to be very standard. She's going, what? Once a week?
They all just
And which day of the week do you think they did it? When would they take their bath? What would be bath night?
Sunday?
Not Sunday.
Saturday night?
Saturday night. To get ready for church on Sunday. When you go to church on Sunday, you want to be clean. And I know this will shock you, but people used to dress in different clothes to go to church than they did during the rest of the week. I know. Very strange idea. But so what they would do is they'd take a bath Saturday night, go to bed nice and clean, right? They'd get up in the morning, they'd put on probably the best clothes they had, whatever that was, clean clothes, regardless. And they would go in clean clothes, probably the best clothes they had, and they would go to church. And, then they kind of rested on Sunday. That was the custom. And, then you start your work week. Now, it wasn't they never, washed their hands. They never did any kind of washing. They just didn't, it wasn't this like daily. They would take what some people would call a sponge bath. I've heard people call it a spit bath. That's even fun. But, you'd have a wash basin and have a rag. You'd wash up with a rag, a little pitcher of water or a small container. And they didn't have all this. Well, people in medieval Europe, can you imagine? There are places in the world, not Florida, that do get cold. I know people here in Florida think it gets cold if it's like 70 degrees, 65 degrees. But I'm talking like really cold. If you lived in Northern Europe, you think you would be, you know what most people did, so it was hard to get a bath? They would have to go down and jump in a lake or get in a river. That's how they washed most of the time. Because otherwise you had to haul a lot of water, heat up a lot of water, then get rid of all the water. That's a whole lot of work. And so you just run down, jump in the lake, wash up a little bit. Are you going to do that in January? February? December? Probably not. People don't even want to get in a pool around here unless it's heated in January, right? So, and it doesn't even really get that cold out. So that means those people are going months without taking a bath that way. Right? So much more likely that this would happen. Well, the plague is going to leave everybody in upheaval because it's going to change the population. Imagine, right now, our unemployment rate in the United States is quite low. I don't know the exact number, but I've heard it's like some of the lowest in like 30 years, right? I don't know what it is, like 3% unemployment, something like that. 3.5, I don't know. Anyway, it's quite low. So what does that mean now if somebody needs starting a new business and wants to hire, say, 100 people, what are they going to have to do? Differently than they say when the unemployment's at 10%. You got high unemployment and I want to offer people a job, guess what? They're probably going to take it. But if a lot of people already have jobs, what am I going to have to do to get them to take my job that I want them to do?
More benefits.
Offer them more money, more benefits, better hours. Yeah, and so that's what happens here. The peasants start to figure out, doesn't take too long, that half of all the people are gone, but guess what? There's still all those fields out there, right? We don't have half the amount of land. We only got half the amount of people to work the land. So the peasants start to say, you know what? If you want me to work your fields, in the past I was forced to work your fields. I was assigned your field. I was a serf. For my whole life I had to work this plot of land. And now, half of us are gone. You want me to work your field? I might go over there and work that guy's field because, that guy over there said he won't make me a serf anymore. That guy over there said he won't take 20% of the stuff. He'll only take 15% of what I raise. I can keep the rest. So things start to get better for the peasants because the reduced population meant that it was a benefit for those who were doing labor. Labor was in higher demand. So with the supply and demand, that means that labor is now has to be more valued in some way. Part of that means that peasants start to be freed from serfdom, become free peasants, that peasants start to even perhaps get some of their own land that they can actually own. Work out a deal. I'll work these acres for you, but I get a couple acres for me. They're just mine. That kind of thing. Well, that leads to revolts because a lot of peasants want to see things change. And so we see by 1381 in England, for example, the people began to move on London. King Richard II is king at this time. He goes out and he promises changes to the people. This is just showing you that what the politicians do today is nothing new, right? The people say, we want this, you have to do this, and what does the politician say? Oh, sure, no problem. Then once they get in power, well, suddenly those things don't happen. And in this case, what happens is we see he later sends his troops to crush the peasant rebels that he promised he would help and send them away if they went away peacefully. And so we see that's what happened. Now, eventually, this kind of upheaval is going to lead, there's also going to be a major war that takes place during this period, the late Middle Ages. The war is going to be called the 100 Years' War. The 100 Years' War, by the way, don't let it fool you, it lasts longer than 100 years. So if you're on Jeopardy or something, sometimes it's exact, like 7 weeks war is 7 weeks. The 7 days war is 7 days. But the 100 Years' War, more than 100 years. All right? How did this war start? It's a war basically between France and England. The King of France, Philip IV, seizes a territory within France called Gascony, but that territory actually is under the Duke of Gascony, who doesn't like that. What you also have to remember is that the Duke of Gascony is also the King of England. Now, how did the King of England get land in France? You ever heard of a guy named William the Conqueror? What did William the Conqueror conquer? Anybody know? William the Conqueror, what does he conquer? Take a guess. Not France, but England. Yeah, he comes from France, and he invades England and takes it over, 1066. But, therefore, those who are ruling England still have holdings back in France. That's how this sort of happens. And so the 100 Years' War, then, is going to be, again, a long-term war. It doesn't happen every year for 100 years. It doesn't even happen exactly 100 years. But it's this long-going fight between England and France over control of France. Because the English monarch, the English rulers, had land in France. And then other people in France didn't really like the King of France either. And by the way, you know, the British and the French have never really liked each other for a long time. I still don't think they do, even though they try to pretend a little better today, right? But you can trace a lot of it back to this, certainly. The French invaded England and took it over, a guy from France. And then this has this long-standing area. Well, eventually Edward will win, but the problem is England doesn't have enough troops, doesn't have enough wherewithal to actually take over all of France and have England just take over all of France. It couldn't happen. And so that meant that they kept fighting back and forth over different parts of the land for at least 50 years. They finally have a truce in 1396. This truce will last for 20 years. It'll be restarted when King Henry V of England will decide he's not satisfied with the way it is and he wants even more land in France. And so the war is renewed. He will defeat the French in 1415. However, again, he does not end up controlling all of France. And these battles then renew. So that's a situation we see in struggle in France. Part of the territory allied with England, part of it controlled directly by the monarch of England, part of it controlled by the King of France and his allies. And this is when we're going to see a young lady, right? A teenaged girl, some might say, entering into this event. Anybody know who she is? Joan of Arc. Yes. Miss of Arc. Well, you'd have to watch Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure to know what I'm talking about. You probably never saw that movie. That's an old one now. It's where history students go back and they time travel and they go back and bring back historic people to do their history report for the school. One of the people they bring back is Joan of Arc. So they call her Miss of Arc. I think that's her last name. Well, anyway, here's Joan. Looks very regal there, very noble. But she was in the picture here. About the age of 17 is when she comes into the picture. There's an alliance of the Duke of Burgundy with England. So England is kind of controlling and is allied with the northern part of France. The central and sort of southern part of France are with the king. I'll put a map up later. Well, Joan believes that God is sending her a message through the saints and telling her that she should go fight. That France needs her help and that she should go and fight. And she actually goes to the King of France and tells him this. you might admit he was a little skeptical that a 17-year-old girl not only is hearing perhaps voices from God or from the saints, but that they're telling her to go into battle against the English. That seems unusual at best, right? But you know what? The king's pretty desperate. He doesn't have a lot of allies. He said, you know what? If Joan, you want to be my ally, let's go for it. So you give Joan a horse. She goes into battle. And guess what? The French do better when Joan's in the battle. Why? Was Joan a great military strategist? I don't know. Was Joan a great warrior? Well, maybe. But they did better. Maybe it was the other soldiers saw Joan was willing to do it, and they said, you know what? If she's willing to do it, well, I should be willing to do it. If she's going to try this hard, I can try hard too. At any rate, for whatever the reasons were, and I'm not sure if we know, the French did better when Joan was in the battle. And this did not go unnoticed by the English and their allies. So they began to target Joan. So we got to take her out somehow. All right? So they will. When Joan comes into the battle, they begin to focus on Joan. How can we get Joan out of the battle? So in fact, what happens is the allies of the English, the Burgundians, in 1430, are able to capture Joan before one of these battles, or during one of these battles. They don't want to be the ones that do anything to Joan, because, they're French, she's French, she's a 17-year-old teenage girl. This is not going to look good for them. So you know what they do? They turn her over to the English. Here you go. You're our allies. This is the girl that's giving you a hard time. We did our part. Here you go. And so what did the English do? They put her on trial. Joan said she had heard voices of saints. They said she's hearing voices of Satan, of demons. They say she's a witch. You can read the trial transcripts. Joan had, there were accounts, they brought witnesses, said, well, yeah, Joan did go out into the woods, and she did circle a tree and help decorate a tree, and this is very pagan. Of course, this was a common custom of a lot of people. At any rate, she's put on trial as a witch. Not surprisingly, she's found guilty of being a witch. She's burned at the stake in 1431 as a heretic. You see, that's what the artist has drawn over here. Got her tied up to a wooden pole. They pile up wood around her and then set it on fire, which sets her on fire. Joan will be happy to know that 25 years later, all the charges were dropped. Okay. Thanks, Joan says. And really happy to know that in 1920, Joan was made a saint. She's now Saint Joan of Arc. Right? She was from the city, the town of Orleans, France. And so if you go here in the United States, if you go to New Orleans, or N'Orleans, however you say it, you can see a statue of Joan. It's a predominantly placed statue of her there in the city, on horseback, as they remember her and her connection to New Orleans through Orleans. Well, anyway, here is a map that kind of shows you this sort of really lovely green is the area that the French king is controlling. These sort of, whatever, salmon color, I don't know what you would call that, sort of tan, that's the part the English control. This is the last phases. And then you see allies to England. So you can see the king needed all the help he could get, and he took it. Well, the war drags on. To make a long story shorter, the French pushed the English out in 1453, and that pretty much ends the war at that point. What we start to see developing in Europe are unified nation states. Up to this point, Europeans identified themselves not as French or German or even English, but more by smaller, like Burgundians, Saxons, that kind of thing. What we're going to start to see now is developing nation states, especially the nations of France, Spain, and England in the western part of Europe become very powerful nations that are going to have a lot of influence. People will identify with them as, you know, I'm French, I'm Spanish, I'm English. And also they will come then to, they're going to come shortly, we won't get to it in this class too much, they will begin to explore other parts of the world, begin to colonize as well. Well, the Renaissance is coming, and that's what we'll be talking about a bit later. But just a couple of words about it here. You might remember we mentioned Renaissance in the realm of the Carolingian Renaissance. Remember that? Renaissance means rebirth. A rebirth of what? In this case of the Italian Renaissance, we've had the whole medieval period. At the end of it, we say we have a rebirth. What's being reborn?
Knowledge and art.
Knowledge and art. Knowledge and art of, you know, if it was reborn, what was it originally birthed as?
Greek humanism.
Yes, Greek. Right. There you go. Another imaginary bonus point. Greek and Roman. Right? Greek and Roman ideas. So that Greek art, Greek thinking, Greek philosophy, Greek literature, Greek drama. And of course the Romans had picked up on that, copied a lot of it. And so when Rome fell, the Greco-Roman stuff fell. But now we got a rebirth. We're going to bring back this classical antiquity, the Greek and Roman ideas, the Greek and Roman literature, Greek and Roman art, Greek and Roman way of thinking. Because during the Middle Ages, their way of thinking about things was the idea that people were sinful, and what people ought to be doing is recognizing they're sinful and trying to glorify God and being very humble in the process, right? But during the Renaissance, they're going to go back to that old Greco-Roman way of thinking about things, where people are not going to be really seen as sinful, they're going to be seen as creative. They're going to be seen as the crown of God's creation and of creative and the beauty that they can create and all that they can do. And all of this will begin in Italy. Why? Well, remember, because the Black Death began in Italy. That means that the recovery from the plague will begin in Italy too. And so Italy, who has all that trade, you get all that money, is also going to recover now first, and then the rest of Europe will be following it later. But it's going to take a lot of wealth, a lot of creative ideas are going to get started there in Italy. And you're going to see the humilities there. We don't know the name of medieval artists, but you know the name of Leonardo, Donatello, Raphael, and all those other mutant Ninja Turtles. We know all the names of them because they signed everything. Well, they were teenage Ninja Turtles. There we go. All right, we're going to end it there for today. Don't say I never let you out early.